All right, we'll get started. We'll probably continue to have people join. Good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Chrissy Clausen, our Director of Programs and Communications at the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, and we are so glad to welcome you to tonight's program. The Chestnut Hill Conservancy conserves, preserves, and celebrates history, architecture, and landscapes in Chestnut Hill and the lower Wissahickon watershed through inclusive and proactive community engagement, advocacy, and stewardship. We are a member-based organization. Thank you to all of our Conservancy members at every level whose support helps advance our various initiatives, including our low-cost or free public programs. Our program tonight is part of our Ask the Expert series, which provides accessible expert advice on key issues related to historic homes, archival collections, community, and landscape care. The Conservancy organizes this free program, which is offered in collaboration with the Chestnut Hill Community Association. In fact, I have the absolute pleasure of organizing programs like this one tonight alongside our fabulous program committee. Many are in the audience. They help with planning, guidance, and provide incredible volunteer support. And tonight I am also joined by our amazing co-chairs, Jean McCoubry and Rob Fleming. Through our public programs, community collaborations, and partnerships with regional and national organizations, the Conservancy has gathered a range of resources to protect or to support stewards throughout the community. And tonight's program builds on that work by focusing on the tools and systems that shape planning, preservation, and conservation across Philadelphia. Our goal tonight is to help build a shared understanding of how these systems work and how residents can better engage with them. We ask that everyone approach the conversation, especially during our Q&A, with curiosity, respect, and civility. As mentioned earlier, the Conservancy's Ask the Experts programming is offered in collaboration with the Chestnut Hill Community Association, or the CHCA. The CHCA is unable to attend tonight, but on their behalf, we wanted to share they are a 78-year-old membership organization that serves as a public forum for the residents and supporters of Chestnut Hill. Their organization is dedicated to improving the quality of life and fostering a strong sense of community through civic engagement, advocacy, and cultural programming. Like the Conservancy, the CHCA is a registered community organization in the 19118 zip code, and CHCA advocates on matters related to land use planning, development, conservation, and greening. They also provide leadership and support many green space initiatives in this area. One of their priorities is welcoming newcomers and helping people connect to the many resources in Chestnut Hill, and more information can be found at chestnuthill.org. I have a few housekeeping notes. Tonight's program is being recorded, and all registrants will receive access to the recording, along with follow-up resources, which include a PDF of tonight's presentation. We'll hold all the Q&A till the end of the program. Please submit questions throughout the program using the Zoom Q&A feature whenever possible. Our moderator this evening for the Q&A is Jean McCoubry, AIA, an architect and Conservancy board member. This program is made possible through the generous support of the Conservancy's lead sponsor, Chubb, as well as our general sponsors, event sponsors, and members. You can see here the logos of some of our incredible general sponsors throughout the year, which include Bowman, D.F. Meyer, Friends of the Wissahickons, George Woodward Co., Merrill Lynch, Nottingham, Walsh, Goodman and Associates, MIS Capital, and Team Wetzel. The 2026 Ask the Experts event sponsors are Ace Hardware Home Services and Krieger Jacobs Architects, with AOS, or Atkin Olshan Shade Architects, serving as our 2026 supporting sponsor. We are especially glad to be joined this evening from Chris Wilson from Ace Hardware, who will share a few brief remarks. So with that, I'm pleased to pass this on to Chris.
Thanks, Chrissy. Hi, everyone. As Chrissy said, I'm Chris Wilson from Ace Hardware Home Services, formerly Unique Indoor Comfort and All Phase Electric. I've had the pleasure of working in the Chestnut Hill community for nearly 20 years. And one of my favorite things about working in this community has been to get to see and spend time in all these historic structures and be a part of that stewardship of those spaces and really continue to preserve them and keep them looking great. Our mission, our vision is to be the best, most helpful provider of home preservation services in the world, on the planet. And that's something that we really strive for every day. So it's just a great pairing with the Ask the Expert series to be a part of. We love being helpful and helping homeowners learn more about their homes and educate them about the spaces that they live in and have maybe never seen in their homes. The depths of their attics or crawl spaces in their houses. So it's just a great pairing to be a part of this educational program and help everyone learn a little bit more about their homes. With that being said, thank you all for being here. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Krista Gebbia, and she is the Conservancy's Director of Stewardship.
Thank you, Chris. We're so grateful for your sponsorship and also your expertise and your work in preserving Chestnut Hill. As Chris said, I'm Krista Gebbia, the Conservancy's Director of Stewardship. I manage our easement program, which has over 52 preservation and conservation easements. The historic fabric of Northwest Philadelphia is woven into the vibrant landscape of the Wissahickon Valley. As one of the stewards of the Lower Wissahickon watershed, we share responsibility for preserving its historic architecture, stories, and natural beauty. The Conservancy recognizes that collaboration is essential for effective preservation and conservation work, and we are prioritizing engagement within community to understand your values and preferences. The Conservancy staff is currently planning a community listening session scheduled for the summer. This session aims to gather input and insights from community members to guide our conservation efforts. While the Conservancy's work centers on the Lower Wissahickon watershed and Northwest Philadelphia, the tools we'll discuss tonight apply to all of Philadelphia. And please note that the presentation will not address any specific projects and is meant as a general overview. The speakers will do their best to avoid the use of acronyms and attempt to make everything as accessible as possible. And our speakers have a deep understanding of the planning tools and resources available to promote neighborhood preservation and watershed conservation. And it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's presenters. First, we have David Guest, Esquire, the Executive Director of the Conservancy. He is a land use attorney who previously worked as a partner in the zoning and land use group at Ballard Spar, and also as the Chief Operating Officer of the Mural Arts Philadelphia. He holds a Master of City Planning from the University of Pennsylvania and a JD from Columbia University. Next, we have Kim Chantry, who is a historic preservation planner supervisor with the Philadelphia Historical Commission, where she has worked for over a decade. She has played a central role in preservation planning and urban redevelopment efforts across the city. She has authored both the National Register and the Philadelphia Register Historic District nomination for Wayne Junction. Kim holds a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. And followed by Meg Cavanaugh, who is an environmental planner for the Upper Northwest District with the Philadelphia City Planning Commission. She reviews development applications for compliance with environmental regulations and the zoning code. Prior to the Planning Commission, she worked with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on climate resilience planning. She holds a Master of City and Regional Planning from Rutgers University. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy what these wonderful speakers have to say tonight. David?
Thanks so much, Krista. Really appreciate everyone being here this evening, and Kim and Meg, and everyone else and our sponsors. I'm very excited to report that we're running slightly early, so we'll be able to pack in even more exciting zoning information and historic preservation and environmental conservation discussion for everyone. So my job tonight is to try to make zoning as understandable as possible and maybe even a little bit interesting. What we're going to do is I'm going to give an overview that focuses on zoning, excuse me, in particular, but also touches on historic preservation and conservation, as well as some private regulations. And then Kim is going to speak about preservation, Meg about conservation and environmental planning, and then it'll be back to me, and I'm going to sort of do a live demonstration of how we in this sort of field research properties, and we want to give everyone who's participating here an opportunity to understand how they can research their own property. So we'll get into that shortly. So just to now launch into the zoning and land use regulation component, what we're going to be talking about tonight is just in general, how does government regulate what can be done with properties? This can be, as you'll see for tonight, done in many, many different ways, the zoning code being the primary one that we'll be talking about tonight. There are different rules for brand new construction of a building versus preserving an existing building and maintaining its historic character. And there's also different rules that apply for the conservation of open space, managing flooding and other environmental concerns. I'll be briefly touching on local, state, and federal laws, but the focus tonight is definitely on Philadelphia. As Krista said earlier, we will have a very slight focus on the Northwest because that's where we're located and do our work. But the intent is to make sure this is clearly applicable to the entirety of Philadelphia. And again, just want to emphasize that this is sort of an introductory overview of what you will see are some very complicated rules and regulations. And so we're sort of scratching the surface. There's more to come later. We really are looking forward to everyone's feedback. If there are follow-up questions, we can plan future sessions that sort of drill down on different concepts. So now I'm going to go ahead and focus a little more on these specific regulations that I alluded to. Just for everyone's reference, this is a nice old map depicting the Wissahickon watershed overlay that's up in our office right now as part of an exhibit. But I already went through this outline, so I'll continue. So I'm going to tell you right now, this is the most dense slide that I have. So it might look like a lot, but I'm going to sort of walk you through some different things. So these first bullet points are I'm going to flip through different concepts that are really essential to zoning. So I'll get to those. I want to be clear what we're not talking about this evening. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we're not even going to get to. That is other agencies that review permitting, for example, in Philadelphia. So the streets department, we're not going to be talking really much about the water department a little bit, but not really getting to the details of their processes. We're not also going to be talking about after zoning. So after you get your zoning permit, there's more stuff you need to do. Generally, you need to get a building permit. There's something called facade review that the Planning Commission engages in. We're not going to be getting into that. And we're also not going to get into the details of what's involved in the registered community organization process, the RCO process. That's a super duper important process. I am going to be mentioning it, but in the context of when it applies, but we're not going to drill down into what the details of that are. So there's a lot we're not covering. So just sticking with this slide to introduce what zoning is. So this image on the right is a 1926 edition of a standard state zoning enabling act. It apparently costs 5 cents, so you can see at the bottom. This is sort of one of the key ways that zoning has been used in the United States. Most initial zoning codes came about in the 1920s. And this is basically, the general concept of the country was going from, an industrial revolution to the growth of cities and urban populations. And it's the basic concept of sort of separating out different uses. The famous Supreme Court case is referred to as Euclid for the city of Euclid, Ohio. And you hear a reference to Euclidean zoning sometimes. All that really means is the concept that you are separating out uses such that you don't necessarily have, an industrial factory use right next door to people's homes. Obviously, that has existed in cities throughout time. I think it's interesting to think about how cities have evolved over time. Now you hear the phrase mixed use development a lot. So there's actually sort of an intention of mixing uses in a way that maybe was not intended at the initial beginning of the establishment of zoning. But essentially, states are delegating to municipalities under what's known as the police power, which doesn't necessarily mean police literally, it just means the ability to regulate your local municipality and how it's shaped. So it's this power that cities have to create a zoning code, to influence where things are built, what size they're built in, where they can be located, what uses are permitted within them. So that's just sort of the basic understanding of what zoning is. Um, Moving on to sort of zones and what that means. So this is a nice color-coded map that most of you should be able to recognize, I think, of the city of Philadelphia. So you have City Hall over to the right, you have University City, West Philadelphia over to the left. You can sort of intuit, I think, from looking at this map, and we'll go to this website later. It's from the Atlas, the city's Atlas website. You can sort of gather, for those of you who've spent some time in these areas, right, what these zone colors probably mean. So the sort of dark red maroon color is generally CMX 5 zoning, or that's a more intense type of commercial zoning for the skyscrapers and the larger buildings in Center City and some in University City. Yellow in this on this website is generally residential zoning. Green is park, not surprisingly. You can recognize the art museum up here. Purple tends to be an industrial type of zone. You might be able to sort of recognize 30th Street Station in this area and train tracks that are under here. So orange is a different type of residential zone. Red is a different type of commercial zone. And this sort of hatched form has to do with some flood-related regulations near the Schuylkill River. So to elaborate on what each zone means, and this applies throughout the city, there are many different types of zones in the city. This on the left comes from the City of Philadelphia's quick zoning guide document. It is helpful. It's also itself a little dense, but this is just one example. An RM1 district is a type of zoning district for somewhat larger scale residential development. And so you can see here various things that appear in the zoning code for that, which is, the size of a lot, how much area on the lot you can occupy. So if you're on a corner, you can occupy 80% of the lot. If you look over here, for example, this is a building that's occupying 50% of the lot. There are other rules about maximum height and some details that I won't get into about dwelling unit density, some bonuses. You can, by doing certain things like providing affordable housing, you can have more floor area. In some cases, this case is a dwelling unit bonus, but you can get a floor area bonus as well. And I just wanted to briefly mention floor area because it's sometimes confusing to people. This is a nice little diagram of what does floor area ratio mean. It's a multiplier of the size of your lot and how much square footage you can have as a result. So if you have a FAR of 1 and you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you can build 10,000 square feet of floor area. Depending on what the zoning code says, that could be arranged as a box like this, or it could be moved over to be 2 stories high like that, or 4 stories high, just as an example. So there's a lot of detailed rules about this. The basic concept is that as a property owner, what you are allowed to do theoretically on your property. So what rules apply and what you're allowed to build on your property. That's sort of the basic concept of zoning. Just to give you a feel for it, if you Google the Philadelphia zoning code, as some of you may have, it's within the Philadelphia code. It looks like this. It's kind of dense and a little difficult to navigate sometimes, but it is doable. So now I want to move to a more complicated topic, which is the difference of by right zoning versus discretionary review and approval of zoning. So don't look at the text yet. I know that's a lot of text, comes from the previous website. It's a screenshot, obviously. So again, the by right zoning is what is permitted sort of normally under the existing zoning code. So theoretically, and Meg will discuss this very briefly, The Planning Commission has actually done a comprehensive plan of the city and sort of studied what zones might make sense in certain neighborhoods. And theoretically, again, those zones are then applied to the appropriate neighborhoods. So you build the right type of stuff in different areas. Um, if you have a, excuse me, by right project, then you should be able to design a building that meets those code requirements, submit it to the city, and once it gets processed, you get your permit issued, and that's it. And there, it has to do with the concept of you as a property owner have reasonable investment-backed expectations of what you can do under the existing zoning code. Um, where the fun begins, that a lot of you have probably dealt with, is when you can't do something by right. When a property owner, the simplest example is if a zone has a 30-foot height limit and you want to build a 60-foot tall building. That's not allowed. But there's a process where you can seek permission to build that taller building. And that generally is the zoning variance process. It means you're seeking a variance from the zoning code. And you have the burden is on you, the applicant, to demonstrate why you meet the criteria for the grant of a zoning variance. So these are those criteria. These are not all of the criteria that exist in the code, but this gives you a feel of theoretically, I use the word theoretically a lot because what the law says and what happens in practice oftentimes different. But these are the things you generally would have to demonstrate. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Some of these terms may sound familiar to those of you who track projects that are going on in the city. You are supposed to, as the applicant or who's usually the property owner, not always, you have to explain why not getting the variance would result in what's known as an unnecessary hardship for your property, that the variance you're seeking is the minimum amount required. So you're not seeking a 100-foot building in my example, or 60 foot, and there's a reason for that, and it has something to do with the shape of your property, for example. Generally not supposed to increase congestion in the streets or the danger of fire. You have to, not injure those on adjoining properties, not unduly burden local facilities, not cause environmental damage. So they're all these requirements that you're supposed to show. And the way you do that, the process is that you apply for your project. The Department of Licenses and Inspections issues what's known as a refusal, say, no, we refuse to issue the permit because you don't meet the zoning code. And then you appeal that refusal to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And then as part of that process, you're obligated to go to an RCO, Registered Community Organization, public meeting, where at which you will get advisory feedback from the public and neighbors. And then you go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and they decide whether or not to grant your variance. So that's the basics of how that process works. Moving on to a different topic. This is zooming in a little bit on an example of the difference between a sort of base or underlying zoning district and then an overlay and changing that. So this is actually our neck of the woods. Our office is over here. This is the property that's the Chestnut Hill branch of the library. They are located in a CMX 2.5 district. You can see here neighborhood commercial mixed use. And this is on Atlas, and I'll show this to you a little later in the presentation. It pops up all the interesting overlays that apply. So these are, an overlay is in what goes on top of, and it can be sometimes more permissive or more restrictive of what the base zoning is. So again, taking height as a simple example, if one zone had a 30-foot height limit, and for some reason, the neighborhood or the planning commission or someone just thought that it would be a good idea that that particular zone should permit 60-foot buildings. Maybe you're trying to encourage development in that particular area. There could be an overlay that said this supersedes the underlying zoning, so we're allowing in this little area 60-foot tall buildings. And so different overlays do different things. And a little bit, we're going to talk about the Wissahickon watershed overlay, which has various environmental regulations. So the last piece of this is remapping. So remapping is another word for rezoning, which just means changing the zoning district of a property. So again, taking this property, generally you don't do it for a single property. It's often for a slightly larger area for a variety of reasons. But for, like CMX2, for some reason, the desire was to change that to CMX3. That's a legislative process. The city council office introduces legislation that says we're changing the maps from CMX2 to CMX3. They have exhibits attached to those pieces of legislation, and that's how that's effectuated. Very briefly, I just wanted to mention text amendments. That's another way that zoning is changed. So this is basically what amounts to an excerpt from the zoning code, but you can sort of tell it's a bit of a different format. So this is taken from a piece of legislation. I'll show you one later on as an example, but this is a example of changing parking requirements that relate to historic properties. So there's an incentive in the zoning code for historic preservation that what amounts to roughly is that if your building is historically designated, you don't necessarily have to meet all of the parking requirements. And so this was a piece of legislation that altered a piece of that. I'm going to get pretty technical, but just to help everyone understand how these things work. If you look carefully here, whenever you're reading a piece of proposed legislation like this, if something is in brackets, like right here, that means that the amendment is proposing to delete that language. And if something is in italics, it's proposing to add that language. So this was a proposal to add the ability to apply off-site parking here. Last sort of specific zoning concept I'm going to mention is civic design review. CDR, as it's known, applies to properties of 50 dwelling units or new construction of 50,000 square feet in residential districts, or 100 dwelling units or 100,000 square feet in commercial districts, roughly. It is an advisory process. The concept is that if a project is of a certain size that it makes a big difference in that neighborhood, it warrants further study and review. This process also requires registered community organization meetings, a public meeting, and then there's a meeting in public with the CDR review committee. And it looks at things that are part of the public realm, like what you see here, materials, location of entrances, landscaping, parking, loading, things like that. But it's an advisory process under the current code. So I'm almost done with my section, plowing through a whole lot of information. So I'm shifting gears slightly. I'm going to talk a little bit about preservation as context for what Kim will be talking about, and then conservation as context of what Meg will be talking about. So on the preservation front, tonight we're focusing on Philadelphia. And so Kim will be getting into some details about the Philadelphia Code and their rules and regulations. This is a screenshot from the Philadelphia Historical Commission website. You can easily access the rules and regulations there. So I'll let Kim get into those details. Just so everyone's aware, the state of Pennsylvania also has a history code that regulates a variety of things, from the nomination of buildings for historic designation to archaeology, for example. And the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission is one of the key bodies that enforces that. On the federal level, there's a lot going on that I'm not going to get into. The National Historic Preservation Act is a big one. Section 106, which comes from a section of that act, concerns the review of federal projects, federally funded projects that affect National Register of Historic District properties, and sort of doing an advisory review process and potential mitigation measures in connection with that process. And that brings me to a clarification that Kim's also going to touch on, but it's a very important difference between the National Register of Historic Places and the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. The Chestnut Hill Conservancy used to be known as the Chestnut Hill Historical Society, and we created the Chestnut Hill National Register Historic District in the 1980s, which includes over 2,000 properties, the majority of the Chestnut Hill area. It's great. It has a lot of incentives related to the fact that you are designated, such as the applicability of the Section 106 process that I mentioned, but it does not protect buildings from alteration or demolition. The Philadelphia Register, that's the body, as Kim will get into, that really restricts that and covers that. So it's a very important distinction that I'll let Kim get into. On the environmental conservation front, tons of laws, arguably more environmental laws than there are preservation laws in this country. So we're not getting into them today, but they're a lot of you may have heard of laws like the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, obviously the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level. Pennsylvania has a Department of Environmental Protection. So there are all sorts of different layers of laws that do apply in the environmental context. Um, this evening, we're going to be focused again on Philadelphia. This is a view of the lower Wissahickon water. I'm sorry, this is the entire Wissahickon watershed. The lower part is down here. Philadelphia is sort of at the bottom. And these are some of the types of things that Meg is going to be getting into that are regulated generally under the zoning code and some other Philadelphia laws. So just to wrap up my portion, I did want to just touch on a different type of way that land use is regulated, which is in the private sector, not from the municipality. Those are easements. Most people have heard the term easement. It can mean all sorts of different things. It generally means sort of the right of one entity or property owner to do something related to another property in the most simple way. This is a screenshot from our website. We are an accredited land trust, the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, and we hold conservation easements, which means that properties are required to remain open as open landscape in perpetuity, or preservation easements or facade easements, which regulate historic buildings and their maintenance. So those are two types of easements we often get involved in. Another type of easement that people hear a lot about are access easements. So if someone has permission to, use a driveway to go through one property to another, that would be an example of an access easement that's agreed upon by the two property owners. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim now.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight to the Chestnut Hill Conservancy. My name is Kim Chantry. I'm on the staff of the Philadelphia Historical Commission, and I'm going to speak briefly about the Philadelphia Historical Commission, what it is, what it does, the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, and then I'll turn it over to Meg. So if we could go to the next slide. So the Philadelphia Historical Commission is a city government agency. We are within the Department of Planning and Development, which also has like city planning, art commission. And so we have a staff of 11, myself included. And then we have the 13-member historical commission itself, and they meet once a month. And the commission reviews nominations to designate new properties as historic, and it also reviews building permit applications to do work to buildings that are already designated as historic. And so the Historical Commission has basically two primary functions, which is to identify and designate new resources, and then to regulate those resources to ensure that the way that work is being proposed to them satisfies historic preservation standards. Next slide, please. And so for the visual learners in the group, myself included, this is essentially how I see sort of the workflow of the Historical Commission. So we have our Historical Commission staff. We're located at 16th and Arch. We're in the office 5 days a week. And we receive all building permit applications for properties that are listed as historic to the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. We receive nominations to add new properties to the Philadelphia Register. We also receive financial hardship applications every now and then. And so these things filter through the Historical Commission staff. For the building permit applications, our staff reviews and approves about 95% of those administratively, meaning we call it like a staff approval. And then the remaining 5% end up going to an advisory committee, and then eventually to the following month to the Historical Commission itself. So those meetings are public meetings. So the Historical Commission is really just reviewing the building permit applications for designated properties that our staff was unable to approve, either because they exceeded the staff's approval authority as outlined in the rules and regulations, or the proposal to the building doesn't satisfy preservation standards. We also have an advisory committee on historic designation that reviews nominations to add properties to the Philadelphia Register. Then we also have a committee on financial hardship. It's an ad hoc committee that meets as needed when we have a financial hardship application to review. Next slide. And then just a quick note, David touched on this, but so in Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Historical Commission, we are in charge of the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, which is completely separate from the National Register of, although a property could be listed on both. And so Chestnut Hill itself is a National Register Historic District. It's not a historic district on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. However, there are properties individually designated in the Chestnut Hill vicinity that are on the Philadelphia Register as individual designations. And the blue markers that you see throughout the state that everyone loves, we get a lot of calls about these. We unfortunately have nothing to do with these. These are done through the State Historic Preservation Office. The only city sort of involvement with these is that the streets department maintains them. So if you do see one that has been knocked down or damaged, contact the streets department. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, it's mostly buildings that are designated, but we can also, the Historical Commission can designate structures, historic districts, of course, sites like a park or a cemetery, objects. We have the boot and saddle sign on South Broad designated as an object. And then we also have a handful of public interiors that are designated as historic. And so to be listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, which is like a nomination process, a property must satisfy one or a property or an object or a site must satisfy one or more criteria for designation, which are outlined here, which I understand no one's going to be able to read this fine print, but the slides will be provided after to attendees. Next slide, please. And so I should say that to be listed on the Philadelphia Register with those 10 criteria, those criteria are really wide ranging. They can do with architectural style or architect or even archaeology. So it's, or social history. So it can really, properties can be designated for any number of reasons. We have about 27,000 properties on the Philadelphia Register currently. And that includes 44 historic districts. So the properties within those are counted in that 27,000. And some properties are technically listed twice on the register, individual designation, and then they may have gotten scooped up in a geographic boundary of a historic district. Next slide, please. This is just a zoomed in view of Northwest Philly because I thought it would be interesting to see what's listed on the Philadelphia Register out in Northwest Philly. So you can kind of see anything that's pink or red is a designated district outline or property. And then the red line, the red lines that you see, that's Germantown Avenue. We have a historic street paving thematic district. So that's a lot of Germantown Avenue is covered under that. And then at the bottom there, that's like Main Street Manayunk is a historic district. And then you can also see that along Ridge Avenue, we have a lot of designations. That's a thematic historic district there. Next slide, please. And then just a couple slides here just to show some various properties that are listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places to show some of the variation. Next slide, please. Again, just covering a few of these different types of properties. We do have some church buildings. We have a couple signs. Obviously, the Divine Lorraine. Next slide, please. And why this is important. Listing on the Philadelphia Register is one, if not only, the way to prevent complete demolition of a building. This example here is from Ridge and Roxborough. This on the left was the Bunting House, which was a property that and a building that I don't think anyone realized that there was a threat to. It was in good condition, and but it was not listed on the local register, which is what we sometimes call the Philadelphia Register. We refer to it as the local register. It got sold and demolished, and now there's this Wendy's there. And this is actually what prompted the community in this vicinity to sort of come together and take the initiative to start on a historic district nomination for Ridge Avenue. And they, obtained the council person's support, and our staff ended up writing the nomination for a Ridge Avenue thematic historic district, which protects the earliest buildings now along Ridge Avenue. Next slide, please. And so while no property is listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, it means that any building permit applications submitted to the city require historical commission review and approval. And so those, as we had talked about earlier, come first to the historical commission staff. We review it, we see if we even have jurisdiction. If it's interior only work, we just stamp it approved and move it on because we don't have jurisdiction over it. All permit applications at this point generally are done online through this Eclipse program that Licenses and Inspections has, that they rolled out in March 2020. So it's actually, well, from my end, it's a pretty convenient program to use. I know there are some applicants who struggle with the nuances of it sometimes, but we've been trying to help them through it over the past few years. And it allows it for the address to be flagged in this system if it's historic, and so it automatically gets routed to our staff then first before Licenses and Inspections even reviews it. Our staff reviews it, and we can request revisions, or we can just approve it and move it along in the review process. And our reviews are usually conducted within 1 to 2 days of us receiving the application. Next slide, please. So the Historical Commission, I like to start with what we don't regulate, start on a high note. We don't regulate building interiors of private buildings. We don't regulate building use. That is a zoning matter. The Historical Commission does not regulate paint color of like wood elements like windows, doors, that sort of thing. And then we also don't regulate things that we consider routine maintenance. So like scraping and painting. We don't regulate landscaping. We don't have the ability to regulate tree removal, which we do get asked frequently. And next slide, please. What the Historical Commission does regulate, though, is pretty much everything else. So alterations, additions, to historically designated buildings, complete demolition, of course, replacement of windows and doors, roofing. I would say windows and roofing are the two types of applications that we see the most. We regulate the painting of masonry because that's generally not good for it, but of course, it depends. So while we wouldn't regulate the painting of wood, we do regulate the painting of masonry, signage, basically everything else. Next slide, please. And to get involved with the Historical Commission's process, we would really encourage folks to attend Historical Commission public meetings. All of our meetings are either, at this point, over Zoom or with a Zoom component. So our advisory committee meetings are just Zoom only. So anyone can attend those and participate just sort of, at your desk, over your phone. There's public comment allowed for each matter that's reviewed at our public meetings. And our Historical Commission meetings are held in person in the sense that our staff is in person and the commissioners are in person, but participants can attend either in person at 1515 Arch Street or over Zoom. We would also encourage the public to be involved in submitting nominations to designate additional properties as historic. Anyone can submit a nomination. That's Philadelphia is one of few cities, I believe, where that's sort of how it works, that anyone can submit a nomination. They don't have to even live within the city. And you could also contact us to come into the office to research a property. This is a photo of our archive room at the office, which I realize looks a little messy, but there is a lot of method to this madness. Like, we know where all the files are, and we have a property file for each address that's designated as historic, and we also have property files for properties that aren't, but we may have, some information on. So it's always worth reaching out and seeing if we have anything for a specific address or a block that you're looking for. We have historic photos, for properties that are designated. We have copies of building permit applications, that sort of information. And then final slide for me. Since everyone will be receiving these slides, I just put some links in here that I thought would be helpful. The top one, I'd encourage you to shoot us an email to the Historical Commission staff if you have any follow-up questions or want to learn more about any specific property. This preservation@phila.gov is our general email. I assure you we respond to it because I monitor that email. So I would receive it. And I would just highlight then also the second link, which is the link to our public meetings page of our website, which has anytime we have a new meeting agenda, it's put up there. And anytime an application is under review by the commission itself or a nomination is under review by the commission, it's put on that web page also. And that concludes my presentation. And I am going to turn it over to Meg Kavanaugh, environmental planner for the City Planning Commission.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Kavanaugh. I work at City Planning Commission. I focus primarily on the relationship between environmental issues and development. And I can give an overview to you now. Next slide. Planning Commission, similar to what Kim mentioned, for Historical Commission, there is a board that primarily gives opinions on legislation. But Planning Commission staff does a number of things, which I can explain to you now. So we're nested in the Department of Planning and Development. You can see lots of our related agencies here, including Historical Commission. Zoning Board of Adjustment also comes up a lot, our commission. But here are the teams that are specific to us. Citizens Planning Institute, or CPI, I believe was mentioned earlier. This is essentially our education arm. They run a course for people to get involved in planning issues. They also have a lot of resources online, which I can talk about. Comprehensive Planning Team is managing the development of Philadelphia 2050, which is a plan to guide development within the city. I can talk about that later. Development Planning is the team I'm on, which is why it has the star. Environmental Planning is nested within that. Most zoning permits are reviewed by the Department of Licenses and Inspections, or L&I, but some authority is delegated to us to review for certain provisions, including all of the environmental ones, or majority of the environmental ones, which I'll talk about. Legislation works more directly on bills of council. Policy analysis primarily handles the capital budget for the city. Art and design team handles civic design review, or CDR, which I mentioned, which is abbreviated here. They also do facade review, a number of other things that have come up in passing. And transportation planning primarily handles land use in relation to transit. I should also say that everyone in the Planning Commission wears a number of hats. So in addition to my job on development planning and environmental, I'm also a district planner for the Upper Northwest, which includes Chestnut Hill as well as Mount Airy and Germantown. So if you live or work in one of those neighborhoods and have questions about development, I'm often a good place to start. Next slide. So this is an overview of what has been done broadly for environmental planning in Philadelphia. Get to the next slide. This is what's happened over roughly the past 15 years. A number of different plans from different agencies, often working together, though. Some of these you may have heard of. Green City Clean Waters is one that a lot of people are familiar with. This is a pretty landmark plan from the Water Department, impacting stormwater management and regulations, compliance with the Clean Water Act. Philly Tree Plan is another one that people are pretty familiar with. This came out much later. Some of the zoning regulations that I'll talk about came directly from this, but it's about increasing tree canopy and forests within our city. Greenworks and Growing Stronger are here. Those are both from, which was managed by Parks and Rec, I should say. Greenworks and Growing Stronger both came out of the Office of Sustainability. Those are focused on like energy efficiency and like protection against climate change, mostly for city resources. They also do run a number of programs and planning efforts in neighborhoods to our flagged here for Eastwick and Hunting Park against flooding and heat, respectively. And Philadelphia 2035, which is the comprehensive plan for the city, guide to development, and broader city initiatives too. But does have a number of specific environmental provisions mentioned and some goals that have informed these, such as restoring stream banks, increasing tree canopy, and guiding development responsibly to limit emissions and protect sensitive lands. Next slide, please. And this is what we're working on now. So these are 3 different plans that are run by different agencies. They'll all be separate plans, but they do overlap with each other, and we all do talk to each other. So the hazard mitigation plan is managed by the Office of Emergency Management. Hazard mitigation plans are required by FEMA for funding, but the goal of them is to protect against damage from disasters before they happen, and a lot of those are natural disasters. So flooding is like the biggest one, but winter storms, many other things as well. The resilience plan overlaps with that a lot. Oh, I should say the hazard mitigation plan is the furthest along. These are all on like different timelines. The draft of that is available now. I have a link to that later, but it's available for review. It's not yet finalized. The resilience plan is the one that has the most active engagement going on now. This is Office of Sustainability's plan, or effort to protect against climate change more holistically in neighborhoods and beyond just city resources. They're doing a big push for engagement right now. They have a survey available, and they'll also be doing in-person engagement through this spring. And then Phila 2050, the comprehensive plan, is still information now. There'll be engagement happening this spring, but obviously considers broader development issues, but environmental concerns will be a priority. Next slide. And these are what the rules are. So these are provisions that exist in the zoning code now. So the Wissahickon watershed overlay was teased. This is the oldest one that we have. This has been in the zoning code since 1975. It's one of the only examples of watershed-based zoning in the country, and it's the only one that exists for a water body in Philadelphia. But regulates, puts a restriction on impervious cover on a lot, as well as setbacks from water bodies such as streams and swales. This is based on a scientific study that was done in the 70s that divides up land into more sensitive areas. So that's available right now at the Conservancy, but we also have a version we refer to. Next slide, please. Steep slope protection. This is in the open space and natural resources section of the code. It works kind of similarly, though. This includes the entire Wissahickon watershed overlay, but other areas as well. You can see that it's mostly focused around the creeks, as well as more sensitive areas and more extreme slopes. This has been around since about 2012. The goal is also to protect water quality, but it places restrictions on, so you can't develop on slopes over 25%. That triggers a refusal, requires a variance to proceed. And then for other types of development on sort of moderate slopes, requires erosion sedimentation controls, or engineering controls to keep soil on site during construction and reduce water pollution from that. I should also say this applies to about 1,400 square feet of development, so typically the size of a row house or larger. Next slide. Landscape and trees. This came out of the Philly Tree Plan, or there were regulations before that, but they were really overhauled in 2022 and 2023. This ties development to new planting requirements. This is housed in 2 different sections of the code. There's different ones for on-site development. Parking lot has a separate one. There's also specific provisions for tree replacement. Typically, trees that are removed as part of development will need to be replaced inch for inch. It also has specific provisions for heritage trees, which cannot be removed without a special exception. That also needs to go to the zoning board. And a heritage tree is a mature tree of a specific species defined. So that's over 24 inches and healthy in diameter at breast height, or DBH. Next slide, please. And these are the other environmental provisions that the Planning Commission doesn't review, so I'm less familiar with them. But stormwater management is reviewed by the Water Department. That requires control measures for construction for a larger threshold than what's required for steep slopes, but works similarly. Flood protection regulates use and development in the federally determined floodplain. That's what's visible here on your right. That's reviewed in combination by licenses and inspections, or LNI, and the Office of Sustainability. And then waterfront setbacks is somewhat similar, but just reviews development, the distance of development from mostly creeks that are defined in the zoning code, and that's also reviewed by licenses and inspections. Next slide, please. And that was a lot of information, but here's how you can learn a little bit more. So I had mentioned that CPI, or Citizens Planning Institute, has tools available. They have this great page called CPI in a Box, where they have very readable information that explains sort of zoning lessons to you. It also has lots of resources embedded in it. The Zoning Quick Guide, which David showed a page from earlier, but does make the zoning code a lot more accessible. Landscape review guidelines. This is targeted towards, if you're applying for a zoning permit, determining what you might need to submit and what might be required of you. The website and the mailing list sign up if you're interested in comprehensive plan, Village 2050. Same thing for the resilience plan. They have more information about in-person meetings on that website too, as well as the draft of the hazard mitigation plan. Next slide. That's my email if you have questions for me specifically, and thank you so much for your time. I'll pass it back to David.
Thanks so much, Meg, and thank you also, Kim. That was great. I'm going to take back over for the final section of our presentation before we get to Q&A. What I'm about to do is I'm going to do sort of some live examples of how one may search for information about our property and try to utilize all of those many tools that we just went through and the code regulations. This is a reference slide, of course. Again, all these links, like with Kim and Meg's presentations, are here because we want everyone to get a copy of this afterwards, so you have a handy reference point to access all of these materials. So these are the samples. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is the type of information I'm about to go through right now. So what I'm going to do is going to stop sharing momentarily, and then I'm going to go over to the internet. Okay, so this is everyone's favorite website, I think, which is atlas.phila.gov. Tons and tons of information here. So this is what it looks like right when you go to it. And as a sample, I've thought of the Chestnut Hill branch of the Free Public Library that's across the street from our office, which is at 8711 Germantown. You don't have to put avenue or street afterwards. You can just put the address and the name of the street or road. You can also click anywhere on the map to get information just by zooming around. So I'm pressing enter here, and right away you see I've been dropped into Chestnut Hill. And I want to point out that you can click at the top right to do a really nice high quality aerial view of a property. I'm going to go back to the map view, but actually it reminds me there's also a drop down of different years, and you can go back in time and see what aerial photos might be there. So there's a lot of cool information there. I'm not going to click on it right now, but there's also low angle aerial photography that you can see. It's better in different areas of the city. You can also do a street view, similar to Google Street View. So there's just a ton of stuff you can do. While I'm on that, I will mention down here at the bottom right is a measuring tool. So you click on that and you can measure a distance like that. It's pretty neat and comes up a lot. In terms of the actual information you can find here, again, a lot. you are immediately put under the property assessments tab for a property. You can see the tax parcel number, of course, the address, who the owner is, what their address is, the size of the lot, what was paid for the property. Um, Sometimes it says $2. It sort of depends on, this is a public property, obviously, so there may be reason for that. You can click here to go to the Office of Property Assessments website. Moving on, though, in Atlas, you can look at the deeded lot. You see that the map changed to show deed boundaries. In a minute, I'm going to go to this website, which is the Philadelphia Recorder's Office website, so you can see documents related to the property. I'm going to go to, there aren't any that pop up here, I believe, because any documents are pretty old, but I'll show you a different property for that. This tab, licenses and inspections, super duper informative usually. You can see things like building certifications, permits, and most fun, in my opinion, is zoning permit documents. So at this point, the vast majority of zoning archive documents have been scanned and are digitally available on the Atlas website, which is pretty neat. Um, I'm going to click on a few of these. So if I click here, um, look at that. We got an old, interesting plan of this property with all sorts of details just popping up there. And then some old permits associated with it. Lots of information there, old letters, all sorts of stuff. Um, you get different things with different documents oftentimes. This one is, you have to scroll down and you have to zoom in, but another interesting plan with some dimensional information of the library. So really neat, and just another example. This is a larger document that has, this is from 1989. I mean, there's just so much information you can gather to research about a property. Some properties have this, some don't. It's a bit hit or miss. It sort of depends on the history of that unique property, but it's always worth taking a look there. So again, it's sort of buried a little bit under the LNI, License and Inspection tab, under the zoning permit documents. Um, the one I was showing earlier, the zoning tab, right? I showed this exact image earlier, right, in my presentation. So you can see those zoning districts and the overlays that I mentioned earlier. You actually can also see when the zoning last changed for the property, which is a relatively new addition. And you can also see the registered community organizations for the property. So there we are, the Conservancy. We have our collaborative organizations there. And you can get access to that and the contact information there. I'm not going to click on now, but you can click on voting information, and so to determine what a city council district, for example. So I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to go to the Historical Commission's website. And it's a great website, a lot of information. The resources tab, which I won't click on, that's where the rules and regulations that I mentioned earlier are. But really easy, you can just click here, find a historic property or district, scroll down, and you can click on this link, search a map. And this is the map that Kim was referring to earlier. It's really neat. It's sort of, it's live. You can scroll around. And what I'm going to do is scroll back up to that library property and zoom in. And if I click on it there, you can see this is just the type of property that Kim just mentioned that was individually designated in 2015. But as I believe Kim used the word scooped up into a historic district as well. So it's actually in the Carnegie Library's historic district we see. And so that's neat. And what can happen is you go back then to do a little more research back to the Historical Commission's website, view Philadelphia's historic districts. Click there. There's the link to the historic districts. There are all those districts. And we can find the Carnegie Library district there, and you're immediately put into that nomination for that district. You can see all of the libraries around the city that are part of it. There's number one, Carnegie Library, and you can scroll through and just tons and tons of information. You get the feel for it down below, or some more detailed information about this particular property. And then I just want to just real quick go back to the map. It just again an amazing resource, and you can kind of see, as Kim mentioned, this is Germantown Avenue itself is a historic district. This is Aubrey Arboretum. You can just immediately get a feel for what properties are designated, what are not. It may look like a lot are designated, but actually a lot are not, to to Kim's earlier point. Um, Now I'm gonna go a little bit more into the weeds, which is going to the Philadocs website. Um, oh, this always happens. There's an old version. Don't worry, you click here. There you go. So this is the um, City of Philadelphia Department of Records. So just going back to sort of property law for a moment, in general, when there's something like an easement on a property that you want to make sure future property owners are aware of, you have to record that document, is what it's called, against the property. And so you can sometimes find interesting things online that have legal restrictions associated with them, deeds, mortgages, other things. So if I click on the search and I go to everything, it's a little intimidating. It's a lot going on, but you actually don't have to do too much to figure this out. I'm going to use our building as an example, which is 8708. You just put the house number there and Germantown, press enter, and it immediately scrolls down and you see that we acquired our building in 1987. There's the deed, there's some older mortgages. You can click on one um, of those documents and then down here in the right view, and then you can actually see the deed. There it is. If you have an account, you can get a copy that doesn't say unofficial copy on it, and it's sometimes a little easier to read. Um, but with free public access, you can see a lot, right? And so our deed happens to be pretty straightforward, but sometimes you can find a deed that has interesting restrictions in it, or you can double check the boundaries of the property, things like that. So I'm going to flip to a couple more websites real quick. Next one is the City Council website. So it's phila.legistar.com. This is the welcome screen. If you click on legislation, you can search. I'm going to search for all years, so that covers everything. It immediately gives you every single piece of legislation that's ever come up. I'm going to search for the word watershed just as an example. It highlights it for you. You can see a lot of interesting examples of bills. I'm going to click on this one, which was enacted back in 2020. It shows you sort of the history of the bill, but you can click on the actual certified copy. Oops, it just opened in, uh, yeah, I thought I had corrected for that. Sorry, it opened in a different window. So I think I'm gonna briefly switch to it. It's in my Adobe. Hopefully you can all see that now. So this is what a sample city council ordinance looks like. I showed you a little excerpt of one before, and you can see this changed a little bit the definition of impervious ground cover, which Meg mentioned. Remember I mentioned, the brackets mean things are coming out. And it defined culvert and sewer, and that was added in italics just to give you a feel for that. I'm going to go back to the slides now just to confirm, or we're seeing the list of resources again. Is that correct? Great. So just for everyone's reference in the future, when they get these slides, we have placeholders for those websites I just went through for everyone's reference. This is also the Planning Commission website. This is that mapping website. This is the legislative website. And then last but not least is the Eclipse website that Kim was mentioning. So this is also a powerful tool. I'm not going to search it live like I just did for the other sites, but if you just go search Eclipse Philadelphia, you will get to this site, and we have a link to it elsewhere. Down here, it says Search Eclipse. If you click the first click here to search Eclipse, you will see a variety of options for how you can search for different zoning permits. You can search by date. You can search by registered community organization. For free, you can also create your own Eclipse account, And when you log in, you'll see a screen like this. It's generally, for people who are applying for permits. So that's the interface for that. But it's also a way for just members of the general public to search for permits as well. So it is a useful resource. And then last but not least, there are a lot of other resources out there. Various organizations throughout the city have resources. This is a screenshot of our website, chconservancy.org. We put together a lot of resources on our website, which are not here, but you scroll down and see them. And then I just wanted to sort of spotlight over here these buttons, these blue buttons, view the National Register nomination and inventory. So as I mentioned, we were involved in the creation of the National Register Historic District in Chestnut Hill. And so on our website, you can click on these things and see the full list of over 2,000 properties, and you can search it by street name and address in the PDF and get a lot of interesting information about properties. It also has information about building permits, the original building permits that were used to create these buildings, and so those are actually available at the city archives, which is another source. And we, of course, have an archive as well in our building at 8708 Germantown. So I think that concludes our presentation, and we're going to begin to open it up for Q&A.
Okay, I'm Jean McCoubrey, and I'm going to attempt to organize some of these questions a little bit into categories, but I may jump around a bit. And all three of you presenters might need to chime in on some of these questions. Should I go ahead? Question for maybe I'll start with the easy ones. For Kim, no, this is not so easy. I think this is a question for Kim. What is the status of the bill sponsored by Squilla on historic preservation, especially the demolition protection clause?
I'm not going to be able to speak to that. I don't know if David wants to.
Yeah, I'm happy to just mention about that. That's a bill where we, the Conservancy, are following extremely closely. If you go to our website, you will see a letter we wrote back in December about the bill. If you join our email list, we actually have been sending out regular updates about that. We're closely involved in discussions around that bill and are advocating for stronger historic preservation protections as part of that. So happy to maybe offline answer specific questions you may have about that, but it sort of continues to be in process, and we do have some information on our website and our alerts regarding the current status.
Kim, I have possibly a more cut and dried question for you, which is there an age requirement for a building or other property to be listed on the city register, PRHP?
There is no technical age requirement for listing on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. The National Register does have a 50-year rule. The Philadelphia Register does not. That being said, a property must be able to make an argument and satisfy at least one of the criteria for designation. And I think what we have found is that if not enough time has passed to determine historic significance, then it may not be something that's ripe for designation at this time. For example, there was a proposal a few years back. I won't say what it was for, but there was, it had to do with an individual who was still living, and there was an attempt to sort of argue for some significance, historic significance related to this individual. And I know that for listing on the National Register, there has to be an amount of time that has passed since the person has passed away. So the Historical Commission felt that there hadn't, this person was still actively alive and working, and there wasn't really a way to determine historic significance. You could determine that they were significant in their line of work, but currently, but that more time needed to pass to be able to say that there was it warranted listing on a historic register.
Thank you. The next question is a little bit more general, I think related more to planning perhaps, but from Scott Axel, how does zoning impact and improve, and how do the various commissions or committees impact and or improve number one, the Vision Zero and pedestrian safety movement through the built environment? Number two, mass transit, such as transit-oriented development, upzoning, et cetera, parking requirements, and also non-vehicular transportation, so bike parking, multimodal corridors, et cetera. That's a fairly complex question, but if anyone wants to attempt to answer that part of that, at least.
I can give a broad overview. I want to start by saying that targeting newer development around transit stations was one of the central goals of Philadelphia 2035. I think that's one that we'll be sticking to for Philly 2050. That's also, manifested in different initiatives that have come out of that. I will say also that zoning does end at lot lines, so it doesn't regulate right of way at all for like improvements that happen within the street. Vision Zero is run. That's specifically a program that's, a national movement, but also a program that's run out of Otis and Streets Department. They put out a report every year, and it's a commitment. And some of the things specific about bike parking, there are some like streets parking lot requirements about that, but it's also frequently commented on in civic design review for larger projects as part of the complete streets review.
And I can just add, thanks, Meg, that in the zoning code, Meg alluded to, but there is a concept of a transit-oriented development overlay that does allow for somewhat more intense development near transit stations and reduced parking requirements. And there is also buried in the zoning code a zoning bonus related to transit improvements. It's not used a whole lot. I believe it may have been used in connection with one of the Comcast buildings and the work done there for the septic station there. But I think that there's always an opportunity to discuss, amendments to the zoning code that could sort of bolster those types of bonuses and incentives.
Okay, and I have several questions. I'll try to group a bit that have more to do with environmental planning and conservation. One is basically how are the landscape and tree planting requirements enforced? And related to that is a question about how can citizens help provide more teeth to legislation to better prevent accidental things such as heritage tree removal. That's just one example, but other accidental things. And how can we transition from fines being a cost of business to actual preventative measures? That's complicated.
Yeah, I can.
You want to take that one?
I can start and hope that this answers. I'll say enforcement is a little bit messy, and my group doesn't have a direct role in that. The primary enforcement mechanism for any violation is with license and inspections. They rely primarily on 311 calls to get that. For tree planting requirements that are part of the zoning application, there is also a little bit of a grace period for new plantings. It's measured, you have 2 years once you get the building permit to plant that in the ground. So I should just say that. To sort of the legislation for teeth, one of the most helpful things you can do is say something like that in this meeting, so we know that there is an appetite from the public. But yeah, for accidental things, I'm not exactly sure what else is included in that. But yeah, prevention is a little bit difficult. Tree removal is, our provisions are tied specifically to when there's a zoning permit is required too. So tree removal for separate things is usually a little different than that. There was a third question. I'm sorry.
Well, I can add on to that a little bit. I think so the permitting process, right, that Meg and others, go through on the city side, right, looks at what people are providing and what they're doing with respect to landscaping. And so sort of like a small way of front end enforcement. But yeah, in terms of um, ensuring that property owners actually plant the trees that they said they were going to plant and stuff like that, I'm not sure. There's only a certain amount of bandwidth, I guess. And I think, you know, there could be, folks who are familiar with what zoning was approved who can, theoretically notify the city to say, hey, I thought that that property owner was supposed to do XYZ. I saw their zoning plan on Atlas and I don't see the trees there. What happened there? Something like that is possible. Heritage trees are really tough. I think that, can't remember, maybe you remember, Meg, that about 5 years ago or so, there was sort of a bit of an overhaul of the heritage tree requirements in the zoning code. I think they're always up for discussion of some sort. Um, I think that in general, heritage trees are evaluated in the context of a proposal to do work on a property. So they're not like designated as, and Kim mentioned this too, they're not like designated historic natural resources, but hey, that's an interesting idea, right? But they're not now. So um, there are a few points of vulnerability, unfortunately, I would say, in the current code.
Okay. Here's another conservation related question from Scott. Is there appetite within the city to require rain retention basins or gardens for filtering rainwater as a default method for stormwater management?
I can't speak to the stormwater regulations in much detail because that's a separate process reviewed by the water department. Also, they're engineers and I'm a planner. I will say the regulations are available online. They're pretty extensive and worth exploring. I should have added those as a link, but perhaps we can have that for follow-up.
That
Okay.
actually reminds me one point I forgot to make during the last part of my presentation when in terms of researching properties and things like that. Um, a lot of times more help is needed, right, beyond what you might be able to just find online. So to be clear, the three of us presenting here tonight are resources for anyone who wants to reach out to us, and our respective agencies or organizations are as well. But also just wanted to acknowledge that, sometimes depending on the complexity of something, it is important to try to retain the services of a design professional. That could be an architect, it could be an engineer, and sometimes the services of an attorney or some other professional. So that is sort of part of the process as well. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you. That is a good segue to another question from Paul, which is trying to protect an older 19th century home and keep prevent its large side yard from being developed. Would this require two separate processes, such as through a historic district, and number two, possibly a conservation easement? So I think that gets pretty site specific. Do you agree with that? And what resources would you recommend pursuing for this dilemma?
I can start on that one. So the Historical Commission certainly hears this concern a decent amount. And the reality of the situation is, even if a property is designated as historic, a subdivision of, let's say, a side yard that's, large enough to be subdivided off, that's a zoning matter, and the Historical Commission does not regulate or does not review zoning permit applications. That being said, the subdivided parcel would retain the historic designation, and the Historical Commission would review any new construction on it for compatibility with the historic context, but it wouldn't necessarily prevent the new construction as a whole. It would just be more of a review of what the new construction looks like and making sure that it's appropriate for the context. So that's sort of the, if you were to try to go the historic designation route.
Thank you, Kim. And then I'll just add a couple of thoughts. One, perhaps a longer discussion for the future would be if a historic resource were designated, and the nomination clearly documented that the open space were a part of the historic features or character of the property, particularly, of course, if it had been sort of landscaped by, for example, a well-known landscape architect. I think there would be an argument that that space needed to remain open depending on what it said in the nomination. And then to answer your other question, yes, definitely a conservation easement would be a way to address the potential gap in coverage that Kim was talking about. So that's a private agreement, as I said earlier, but the Conservancy is an organization that can take on an easement like that, which would maintain that open space in perpetuity.
Okay. One question, this actually was in the chat instead of the Q&A, but what is the current status of the Philadelphia Green Plan? Is it funded and underway? Sounds like a planning question.
If you know that one, I'm not sure about that one.
I don't know about that plan either.
Yeah, that's not one that I'm seeing in development.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, but as I mentioned, the plans that are in development, these are things that are being considered, and they're working on engagement now.
Okay. Okay, this should be a fairly easy question, maybe for David or Kim. What about older buildings? Like in Chestnut Hill, many buildings are 1860 to 1880. Would those have had building permits that show up in the archive, or were they not needed then?
Great question. Our archivist, Alex Bartlett, is, I don't believe, with us, who would definitely know the answer to that. But I think that, oh, maybe Kim knows the answer to that. Yeah, I think that we have some building permits on file, and we've seen a smattering of ones maybe from that era, but that is relatively old. And I'm not sure that Kim, maybe if the city archives actually has going back to that date.
So my understanding is the city archives, their collection of building permits starts at 1889 at the earliest. So it wouldn't include the 1860 to 1880 buildings. That being said, if you were interested in not necessarily finding, the original building permit, but finding more information related to the property around the time that it was built, there are other resources. The Athenaeum of Philadelphia has a website that you can find information on. It's called Philadelphia Architects and Buildings. And through there, they also link to canceled fire insurance surveys. So a lot of times you can find a written description. I will say this is more for sometimes higher style buildings, wealthier property owners maybe who were insuring their buildings. But you can find a multi-page written description of the building as it stood inside and out from around the time that it was built. And the Historical Society of Pennsylvania has a collection of those. That's where most of them are housed. So that's also another option if you were looking for to find out more information about the building that around the time that it was built or shortly thereafter.
And real quick, that also reminds me, thank you, Kim, that the Philadelphia Contribution Ship is another very old insurance company that may also have information dating that far back for some buildings.
Still in business. And okay, one last question. And this is maybe not the easiest question to answer, but maybe I don't know who to give this one to. Why are there no local historic districts in Chestnut Hill?
Yeah,
David?
thank you. It's a great question. I won't venture to guess at the true answer to it. I don't really know. I mean, the basic reason is none have been nominated and designated by the Philadelphia Historical Commission. Um, but I think it's actually something that Krista Gebbia, our Director of Stewardship, sort of alluded to at the beginning during her remarks. It's an issue that we at the Conservancy think a lot about. As I said before, there's the National Register District, but that doesn't include all the protections of a local register district that Kim went through. So we are going to be doing some work this summer to have a public meeting to sort of talk through what it means in more detail, like what Kim was going through, to be in a historic district, get feedback from people, think about other ways, other tools, some of which we reviewed this evening, that you could protect, ways you could protect historic resources. So it's something we think a lot about. And if you're interested in learning more and have strong feelings about it, please do reach out to me about it. Thank you.
I think that does it for the Q&A. And we're right at 8:30. What do you think?
Great. Thank you so much, Jean. And I want to thank Kim and Meg one more time for all of your time and effort putting this together. Really appreciate it. Thank you to our staff. Thank you to our board members, our sponsors, and really to all of you who participated this evening. And to those of you in the future who are watching a recording of this, thank you. We're always available to answer questions, as I mentioned earlier. Our contact information is in the slides or in the materials with the presentation. So we really are going to do our best to be responsive to any questions that may come up in the future. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we really enjoy, talking about these various sometimes dense regulations that affect everyone's lives in Philadelphia and everyone's properties. And so I'm really happy to continue those conversations in the future. So thank you all very much.
And then I'll just do a quick wrap up. Thank you again for everyone who came, and especially round of applause, virtual round of applause for our amazing presenters. David is our in-house self-proclaimed and proud zoning nerd. So we are very thankful that we got to experience this tonight. And also we love the wonderful Kim and Meg. You guys did so much great information. We're really excited to share the PDF with everyone. Thank you to all of the attendees, our partners, Chris from ACE, as well as our other sponsors. As a reminder, this recording and the resources will be emailed to everyone who registered within a week. Please view our calendar on our website. It will have upcoming programs, including we have a very special program next month. It's on our Discovering series about the Philadelphia's first registered woman architect. And then in April, we have a walking tour with the fabulous George McNeely. And then in May, we have more walking tours and also member-only programs. So we are a member-supported organization. If you do have any questions, please go to our website at chconservancy.org or stop by our office at 8708 Germantown Avenue. So thank you so much. Good night.